Hello, guys. Welcome back to another exciting episode on the show. You guys know I only bring the best of guests to the show. Today we have Lucinda Sage-Midgorden on the show. Lucinda, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dominic. I'm very happy to be here.
All right, so Lucinda, I would like you to introduce yourself to my audience.
My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. I'm a retired educator. I live in southern Arizona. My field of study is theater, and so everything I do now is about stories. That started when I was a child. My parents started us on movie night when we were pretty young, and we would discuss the movies and the television shows that we watched. My parents wanted us to understand what it meant to be a human being, and that's why they did that. And I loved them, and I began to study. Everything I studied was about theater or about movies or stories. I became an avid reader. I call myself a serial reader because I start one book right after I finish a book. So I'm always working on a book. And let's see, when I was close to retirement, I was working part time at the local community college. It was 2020 and the pandemic, and so we had learned to use Zoom to teach our classes. And that's when I decided to start my podcast, Story Power. So it just celebrated its sixth anniversary last month. And then about a year and a half ago, my sister and I started a YouTube channel called Classic Cinema with the Sage Sisters, where we take one classic movie every other week and we analyze it and hopefully encourage people to go watch it because it's really interesting how older movies will have something to say about what's going on right now. I'm also an author. I think it was 2017, I published The Space Between Time. It's a novel. And the sequel novel, Time's Echo, is with a beta reader. She's analyzing it for me and helping me fill up the holes or make sure the timelines are correct. And then I'm also working on a memoir, which is everything I need to know about being human. I learned from movies, and I'm going back and looking at all the movies that we watched as kids with our parents, and then movies that I have enjoyed even now. So I'm retired and I enjoy all of my creative endeavors. And that's it.
All right, Lucinda. So I have some questions there for you. And
Okay.
your father taught you to look for the deeper layers in stories. Do you remember the first story that made you realize there was more beneath the surface?
Yes, I think the first one that I really connected with, I think, was a movie called Backstreet. And it is a melodrama. So it's about this couple who fall in love, but he's married and he keeps trying to get a divorce so they can be together. And eventually she meets his wife and realizes that his wife is a raging alcoholic and she's very abusive. And so she agrees to an affair with him. And the thing about that movie was that his marriage was in shambles. His wife was very abusive. He but he couldn't get a divorce from her. She wouldn't give him a divorce. And it was the late 1950s or early 60s, and that was just not a thing then. People usually stayed together even if they were unhappy marriages. Um, but the love between Ray and Paul, the two people who were having the affair, was really healing for him because he'd had this horrible time with his wife and she treated their children really badly, and he kept trying to protect the children. So That was a really turning point for me because, we have these rules about how society should work. And these two people broke the rules, but they broke it because love was the center of their relationship. And I started to look around me and see the relationships of boyfriends and girlfriends at high school and married people in church and just look at whose relationships were loving and whose weren't. And my mom and dad had a very loving relationship, so it was wonderful to observe them together. And that was kind of the first one. I think I was 16 years old, and then I also realized that if I could read the body language of my fellow students, classmates, and the people around me, I might be able to understand what they were thinking and feeling. And so, and then my father always taught us to ask questions. What, when we would say, why is this character doing this or making this choice? He would say, well, let's think about what happened before the movie started. Maybe they had a really bad childhood, or maybe something happened to them that was traumatic before the movie started. Or, maybe they had a happy childhood. And, so we were always thinking beyond what was on the screen, and I carried that over into my everyday life. So that was the first one.
Okay. So Lucinda, you grew up in the 1960s, right?
Yeah, I was born in 53, so 50s and 60s. Yes, I did
So
grow up
how
in.
did that era shape the way you saw stories, culture, and the world?
Well, it was a turbulent time. Not quite as turbulent as right now, but in the United States, there were lots of demonstrations against the Vietnam War. There were women wanting equal rights, and they were demonstrating for equal rights. There was the civil rights movement. Actually, that was the first one. And so my father was a news hound. He liked to watch news in the morning and when he came home and right before he went to bed. So we had the news on quite often at our house. And watching the demonstrators get beat up by the police or National Guard or whoever it was really traumatic for me. And and then of course three or four we had four major assassinations from 1963 until I think 1968. There were two assassinations. Our president and Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Robert Kennedy Jr., John Kennedy's brother, were all assassinated. And it was very traumatic because they were people who wanted to change the society. And to me, it always felt like there were people who didn't want the society to change. And so they just assassinated our leaders, our important leaders. So it kind of prepared me for what's happening now in the United States. It's probably not just the United States, probably more around the world too. And we need to kind of stand up for our rights. And yeah, there are lots of different ways to do that. And so I think it was traumatic in a way, and in another way it was really good that I lived through those times because it made me examine who I was and who I wanted to be in the world.
All right. So Lucinda, you were the only woman majoring in religious studies at a Christian college in the late 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like?
I loved the classes, but I was the only woman in the program. There were only it was a small college that I think there were only like 2,500 students in the whole college. So in the religious studies program, I think there might have been 15 or 20 students who were studying for that degree. And I was the only woman. So let's see, I started college in 1975 and I graduated in 1979. So I changed my major to religious studies in the spring of 1975. And there were a lot, well, there were, I'd say a group of about 5 or 6 guys, men, who would come every meal. They would come up and they would try to talk me out of being in, studying that, because at that time, women were not ministers in the church that I belonged to. Um, about 5 years after I graduated, women did become ministers in the church that I grew up in. But they thought that I guess they thought that I was above, trying to do something above my station. I don't know. I kind of blocked out what all of the trauma of that. They were always thumping their Bibles at me and telling me that the Bible said that I should not be doing this. And uh, yeah, I was pretty angry about it, but I stuffed my anger until much later, and then I started to work on how I felt about that whole thing. But I enjoyed my classes, and I learned a lot about ancient cultures and how the religions got formulated, and what they believed in, which pretty much all religions have similar uh, tenets, like um, love is really important and taking care of your neighbor is really important, even though their doctrines might be a little bit different. So that was that. But at that time, when I was going through some trauma, that's when somebody suggested that I get involved in theater and start journaling to help myself feel better. And those two things really did save me. And then I added theater and speech after I graduated from uh, with my religious studies degree. So I don't think about that much anymore, but it was quite an experience.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucinda. So, you spent decades teaching theater. What can theater teach people about life that traditional classroom education sometimes can't?
It's only been in the last couple of years that I realized that stories, well, I knew this before, stories are one of the most ancient teaching tools. But I didn't formulate this idea that one of the best ways, or one way to learn emotional intelligence and compassion and empathy and caring for others is through stories, because we get to read or watch and empathize with the characters, or we get to see the characters who are not good, and we get to maybe understand why they're not good characters, why they're evil, why they want to hurt other people. But it's just a way to learn to feel what other people are feeling, and to have compassion for them. And in the United States, I don't know how it is in other countries, um, to the last several years, probably 20 years, the emphasis has been on the sciences, on studying the sciences, because the sciences are what's going to save humanity. But I have just recently started to put the idea forward that it's the arts and humanities that are going to save humanity, because they're the ones that analyze historical events and how they happened and what people's emotional reactions were to those events. And stories help us understand the emotional trajectories of the characters in the stories. And movies help us understand sometimes political um, things that are happening, even if it's like Star Wars, Star Wars or a fantasy, a sci-fi or fantasy, sometimes can help us take a step back and look at what's it's like they're like metaphors for what's happening in our society. And so I just think stories are one of the most important things that we can study if we want to be a responsible human being in living in on this planet.
Okay, so tell us about the space between time. What story were you compared to tell, and what do you hope readers discover beneath the surface?
Well, The Space Between Time actually started as a very different novel. I started writing it in 1999 when I was substitute teaching and I had time to come home in the afternoon and write. And my father had heart disease, and I knew that he was declining. He happened to be what I consider my mentor. And so I wanted to write how a daughter and a father uh, could how the father could influence the daughter and help her become a whole human being, because I felt like that's kind of what my father's aim was in starting the movie nights, was to help me grow and be compassionate and empathetic and all of that and become a whole human being and find what my purpose was in life. Well, then I started teaching full time, and I didn't have time to write, because when you're a teacher, there are all this paperwork stuff you have to do and grading and So I didn't have time, and I set that aside for a while. When I started teaching part-time at the college, I had more time because I was only teaching like 3 or 4 classes, and I had plenty of time to concentrate on the book. So I picked it up again. But once I picked it up, um, it it evolved into a 2 timeline story where a woman in the past in 1859 lives on the east coast of the United States, and she goes via wagon train to Oregon, which is on the west coast of the United States, to become a teacher. And her father had just died. And it was just the two of them because her mother had died when she was young. She didn't have any siblings, and he was a minister. And so they were involved a little bit in the abolitionist movement, because this is before the American Civil War. And also, um, she was very involved in helping, you know, she would go if someone was sick, she would go and help them. And of course, she went to college and became got her degree in teaching. And then the other timeline is her 3 times great granddaughter, who grew up in Oregon, and she has this terrible week where her fiance breaks off their engagement. Her mother is in a terrible car accident and dies, and she loses her job because someone has framed her for embezzlement from the publishing company that she works for. And all of that, of course, gets worked out. But so she goes back from Portland to her home in Roseburg, Oregon. Her mother has left her the house, and she regroups. And when she's there, she finds this box that it looks like it's never been opened. It's locked. She has to go find the key. And when she opens it, there are about 4 journals in it. And when she sits down to read the first journal, her consciousness enters her three times great grandmother's consciousness. And it happens to be the day of Morgan's father's funeral. Well, Jenna is in the present, Morgan's in the past. And Jenna starts to, whenever she opens the journal, she goes into the consciousness of her three times great grandmother. But when she's finished, she comes back and there's no time has passed in her timeline. But she's learning things from Morgan, and Morgan starts to realize that there's some presence with her, and they start to communicate with each other. So they're both helping each other through whatever traumatic times they go through in the book. But but Morgan is formed, a lot of her ideas are formed by her father. So in a way, it's still a tribute to my father, but not in a direct way. And then the sequel to it, there's only going to be one sequel, is about them both being involved in their respective suffrage women's movements. So it took me a long time to write that one because there wasn't anything to do for Jenna to do in the present when I first started the book. And then in the United States, the Harvey Weinstein thing happened, and it started to blow up all these famous men who had abused women. And so then Jenna had something to do after that. And so I could write her story. So that's those two. And it's available. The Space Between Time is available on Amazon, although it hasn't sold a whole lot. So it's kind of hard to find. But if you look for my name, Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and The Space Between Time together, you can usually find it. Does that answer you?
Lucinda. Yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say, does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. That answers my question. So, after decades of learning, teaching, and creating, what has lifelong learning come to mean to you at this stage of your life?
Well, my husband and I watch the Apple TV series Ted Lasso. And in one of the episodes, he quotes one of the United States famous poets from the 1800s, Walt Whitman. And Walt Whitman said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I had never heard that before, but that actually is kind of my life motto: be curious, not judgmental. And so I'm curious about all the people that I interview on Story Power. I'm curious about how the classic movies still have messages for us today. I'm curious about what happens to the characters in the books that I read. I'm curious about my friends' lives and my family's lives, and every people I meet. I'm curious about them. So I'm always wanting to learn more about history, things that happened in history, or how we can make the world a better place. Yeah, I'm always wanting to learn something, because it's boring to always be living the same life over and over and over again every day. I want something new and exciting, to learn or to come into contact with every single day. And even though I'm retired, I still want to do that. I want to keep learning. I want to keep making contact with people. So,
All right, Lucinda, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. The journey is a beautiful reminder that stories don't simply entertain us, they teach us how to see, question, understand, and experience the world, from theater and literature to travel, cinema, spirituality, and teaching. You have spent a lifetime looking beneath the surface, and perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts a storyteller can give us. Once again, Lucinda, before you go, is there a question you wish I would have asked you that I have not asked you? Probably something you would like to share with my audience as well.
I think you've asked me a lot of really great questions. The only thing is, I want to say that I'm hoping to get my memoir published at the end of the year. It's called Everything I Need to Know I Learned, Everything I Need to Know About Being Human I Learned from Movies. And so I'm hoping to publish that soon, and hopefully somebody will get something out of it to do the same thing that I did. Look beneath the surface of not only the stories that you consume, but the lives of people that you come into contact with. That's the only thing that I would like to say.
Okay, Lucinda, thank you so much. So, how can my listeners connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Well, I am on LinkedIn and Facebook. I have my name, Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, on both of those. Also, I have a group, Classic Cinema with the Sage Sisters, on Facebook. My website, which is really old and needs to be revamped, is Sage Woman Chronicles, and it's on WordPress at sagewoman.life. And people can contact me through that, or they can contact me through Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm on other social media platforms as well, but I don't pay attention to them as much as LinkedIn and Facebook. So that's how people can contact me.
All right, thank you so much, Lucinda. I really appreciate you for coming. And to my audience, thank you all as well. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Do have a wonderful day ahead. Bye, Lucinda.
Thank you. Bye bye.